Let's react to what Zac Taylor had to say at the Combine, plus the NFLPA report card is out for 2024, and there's some progress and some room for improvement.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, bringing you coverage of the Cincinnati Bengals every day here on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast. Today, diving into the NFLPA report card, which has the Bengals at 26th out of 32 NFL teams. We'll go into the specifics there. We'll talk about what Zac Taylor had to say in Indianapolis. James, you're in Indy. Let's just start there really quick. You've heard from a lot of Bengals coaches. You've heard from Duke Tobin. Are you having a good time? That's my most important question because I didn't talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Indy's great, and it's perfect for the Combine, and hopefully the Combine is in Indianapolis for the rest of time because it's perfect. And that's not just the Cincinnati and me saying that. I think a lot of people here feel that way, even those that have to fly to get here. But I certainly don't mind the 90-minute commute.
Yeah, I mean, people rave about the logistics of the Combine. For the purpose of what it is, for the way the city's set up, I've not made it myself. Maybe one day. James, let's talk about this NFLPA report card. We talked about it for the first time last year. They followed it up with another effort in what seems to be now an annual process. And a lot of similar grades for the Cincinnati Bengals, but some significant areas of improvement as well. The bottom line, 26 out of 32 when the NFL compiled everything and put together their overall rankings. This is, of course, ahead of teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers and Kansas City Chiefs. And as Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, pointed out, the last 5 different winners of the Super Bowl were ranked 20th or lower. So clearly not a huge correlation between these report cards and winning Super Bowls necessarily, but interesting nonetheless. And right before free agency, again, this report comes out and could be a little bit of a tiebreaker like we talked about last year for teams that are looking at similar offers for similar opportunities between teams.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the fact that the Bengals, when you look at these marks, and we can get into specifics, but they've improved a little bit. They're 26th instead of 27th. They're looking to upgrade the locker room and take steps forward. I think that stuff does matter a bit. And these report cards, look, I'm in Indy. There are media members obviously posted them. I posted them on All Bengals. You tweeted them out. A lot of people have reacted social media wise, but it is a talking point and it is a discussion through amongst the NFL here. And that's, I think, why the NFLPA releases it when it does, is because the biggest convention for the NFL annually is right now. Everyone's in the same city, from whatever GM you're thinking of to whatever head coach and all the way down to position coaches. And so it is interesting, and it is interesting time-wise as well. You're right. Before free agency just a few weeks away, and some common themes from last year to this year from a report card standpoint for the Bengals, even though they moved up a little bit in the locker room, is something that will move up, I think, next year on the report card. Certainly some things that we saw last year as well.
And 2 new criteria this year that the players were able to answer in the NFLPA survey: the head coach and ownership getting grades, getting comments for the first time. They didn't do that in 2023. And somewhere the Bengals came out pretty well. Head coach Zac Taylor, very well liked. A lot of coaches got A's if you look around the NFL, but Zac Taylor comes in at 10th. He was actually second out of 32 head coaches in terms of 98% of players thought he used their time efficiently. And that's something that I think is a positive note for Zac Taylor, a known players coach. And so kind of affirming what we thought. The players, every time they have an opportunity to talk about Zac Taylor, seem to say nice things. Mike Brown coming in at 25th, or the ownership group, not just Mike Brown, this extends to the entire family, really, coming in at 25th out of 32 teams with a C+. And this, I think, more than anything, is just kind of a reflection of everything else. And it's very much in line with their overall ranking because the players are voting on all this stuff, and their impression of ownership is going to directly correlate, I think, in most cases, with how they feel about the rest of the facilities. Players reacting very positively to upgrades to the training room, and reacting, I think, in the future will react positively to the locker room upgrades, like you mentioned, James, but specifically mentioned in the Bengals report card that talks about the Bengals specific comments and ratings and grades, where players were encouraged by the training room update showing willingness from ownership to invest in the facilities. And that's something that we're going to see again with the locker room upgrade that's been announced coming for 2024.
Yeah, and I think that's an important piece here. And when you look at the fact that they're willing to upgrade, it could, because they don't have to. I think that's something. It's not like the Bengals have struggled to get free agents. It's not like the Bengals haven't won games over the past couple of years with their locker room. But I do think that they're showing things. And by the way, showing things that they care about that they haven't necessarily prioritized in the past. They deserve credit for that. I also think that all these trends, and we'll discuss a bunch of them historically about this team and this franchise, they added to their coaching staff. They didn't subtract. They didn't stay the same. They're doing these things to the locker room. They've spent money in free agency. They're going to continue to do that this offseason. It's hard for me to say, oh, it's the same old this or that. The historical trends, a lot of those have been broken over the past 5 years or so.
And they have a few that they can continue to address. I think you look at the report card from last year to this year. They upgraded one of the complaints from last offseason. They knew that was an issue. They addressed it. They knew the locker room was something that needed modernization, needed to be redone. They're going to address that this offseason. And the most notable thing there, when you look at the Bengals specific comments, half the showers in the locker room reportedly don't function properly, lacking either warm water or water pressure, plumbing issues, 5 functioning toilets for the entire team. Like, this is basic stuff that the team had to address one way or another. And in addition to that, we should see stuff like the outlet issue resolved, the locker room size complaints being upgraded as they go through this process. And the modernization should be reflected in, again, increased faith and ownership for willingness to invest in the team. We know that there's that 36, 37, $38 million project, $1 million of which is coming from Hamilton County taxpayer money to do some stadium renovations, upgrades. We know the field will be upgraded as well, still turf, but by all accounts, better turf. Don't know if we've even talked about the field changes on this podcast or not, but this stuff could matter insofar as, like we talked about, players are aware of it. This is the second year this is going on now. Agents are aware of it. And while money is always going to be the bottom line, look at everything from undrafted free agents to the top of market deals, the decision to franchise tag T Higgins. Look at any of those deals, from the league minimum to the franchise tag and beyond. Joe Burrow's contract. Money is still the bottom line in the NFL, but then you have stuff like Orlando Brown wanting an opportunity to play left tackle. Sometimes there are these little factors that come up and players wanting to be in certain spots. And for those reasons, I think when we look at the things where the Bengals are for the second straight year at the bottom of the NFL, it's worth ownership's time to upgrade, because these little things will matter to different people in different ways. And like I said, it could be a tiebreaker for free agents if they're looking at same money, same opportunity, same competitiveness ballpark. You know what I mean? That could be a bit of a tiebreaker. So we will talk about those areas for improvement and why it seems like, in a lot of ways, it really seems like low-hanging fruit, right? Something that the Bengals could address if they were so inclined. We'll finish this topic before we get into Zac Taylor coming up next.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and to make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. And whether it's working more efficiently so you have more time to take up a new hobby, whether it's prioritizing what you need to at work, if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Even if you're busy this week in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, well, they will still have time for you. And all you do to get started is you fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
The areas for improvement for the Cincinnati Bengals are largely the same as last year. The training facilities, a clear upgrade, locker room, something we know they're working on. But the three things that remain on the list, as it were, that we know the Bengals will have to deal with one way or another are the treatment of families category and food related category, diet related categories. And these largely seem money related. Some of them are logistics and space related, I think. But the food one really stands out to me, James. It's something that if the club wanted to address it, they pretty easily could. And if there's one old narrative that really kind of pulls through into this one, it's the old, they have to pay for their own Gatorade kind of stuff. And this food topic in the report card,
Which they don't have to do, by the way, now.
yeah,
Just so
right. Yeah.
Just so we're clear. But the food thing is interesting because it's two sides. One, I've walked by the food plenty, and I think the food is fine. Now, fine is different for NFL players that you want to be eating at a high level, and versus James, the writer walking by, of Locked On Bengals because he's hungry for lunch. Like, I would love to be able to eat what they're eating. At the same time, I think that having a nutritionist on staff makes a ton of sense. Having someone that can help create plans for each individual and have those locked in and have meals that makes a ton of sense. So that's the area that I think for sure should be improved, can be improved. It's pretty easy to see how. The resources are there. They have a cafeteria. The resources are there. They can throw money at the issue to fix it. And I don't think it would cost insane money, by the way. We're not talking about millions and millions of dollars here to do so. So yeah, I think that's the one of these that is fixable that I expect to be fixed. And part of it is pretty simple. You want your guys to get the most out of your guys. Well, upgrading that area and not being an F, getting it to a C even would do wonders for where they're at in this overall ranking from the NFLPA.
And it would inspire more confidence in ownership. That ownership grade would go up as well. I think you would see the investment. You would see the return on the investment rewarded by faith and ownership from the players. And as long as you're achieving on the football field, that's all fine, right? We talked about earlier how this stuff isn't necessarily correlated with Super Bowl success, but just from the report card, 19% of Cincinnati Bengals players that responded to this survey felt like they got an individualized plan. That's 32nd in the NFL for diet. And the NFL wide tendency to employ a full-time dietitian is not one that the Cincinnati Bengals employ. So no full-time dietitian on staff. Again, an easy solution. They have a part-time dietitian, however, that received the lowest grade of any dietitian in the league. So a big area for improvement there. Again, you throw money at the problem, you bring in a dietitian, you bring in a full-time dietitian that is going to provide individualized plans. You may even get some improvements on the field with improved dietary plans for your players. And then the only other thing here is the Cincinnati Bengals remain one of two teams in the NFL that does not provide 3 meals a day throughout the week. There's a small improvement here from 23 to 24 in that they're providing dinner on Wednesdays. Now, again, this is a money issue. You throw money at the problem, you provide an extra meal, and boom, you solve the problem. The other complaint here is that players are in the building on off days. The cafeteria is not even open on those days. So another one that's low-hanging fruit. The family issue recurs from last year. There's a bunch of stats here. One of 4 teams that doesn't have either a family room or daycare. So in the minority of NFL teams here, some specific requests from the players articulated in the survey. They rank 32 out of 32 NFL teams in treatment of families. I will say on the topic of treatment of families, this is one that across the NFL, really bad grades for like half the teams in the NFL. This is not an area that most NFL teams are excelling with, but the Bengals seem to be exceptional in that area. And again, it just seems like low-hanging fruit, right? These are things that could be potentially easy to address if the club were so inclined, and it could matter in little ways, making things better for families, making things better for quality of life stuff for players. It's low-hanging fruit for a club that should have plenty of money for these problems. Every single NFL team should be able to address this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think, and this is coming from a dad, and I think I said this last year too. The daycare thing is so weird to me. I get it. NFL teams do it. All right. Well, there are plenty of daycares. Like I that part's weird. I don't necessarily think that is something the Bengals necessarily have to do. I get the luxury. I get how valuable it would be. I do. I obviously. Heck, I would ask if I could use it, right? But at the same time, I think that's a space thing, and that like there's 1,000 areas of that I would prioritize over that, including during game day. I think the game day stuff could be solved much easier than having a full-time daycare during the week and during the season. I think that's really tough. But the having a family room, having a place for the families to gather after the game, all of those things, I think that's pretty simple and something that they honestly will probably have to add when they revamp the stadium, but certainly something that they should consider down the line for sure.
For what it's worth, before we pivot and start talking about Zac Taylor, the report card in the comments do specifically indicate daycare on game day. That's what the players in Cincinnati responded that they were looking for. They were just looking for that game day child care. So there is that. Bottom line for me, James, here is they are making significant improvements to areas that the players have outlined as areas for improvement for this team. The training room improvements were very well received. The locker room improvements should be well received if they do it well. Upgrading the field, they're late to do it, should be well received. They still have easy issues to fix, and it seems like issues where they could do it if they wanted to, and we'll see if they prioritize it. That's the bottom line.
I think, I still think daycare on game. I think that's hard to pull off.
Yeah, sure.
Like if you're a parent and you're bringing the kid to the game, then that's fine. But the kid's going to be with you, and your kid's going to be with like that. I think that's
the entire NFL does it poorly too. So it is worth saying that. Like that's one where half the teams in the NFL are at a D or lower grade, I think, in the report card. Let's talk about what Zac Taylor had to say, James. Some very interesting remarks. He talked about the coaching hires and that process being different. He talked about the running backs a little bit. Both Joe Mixon and Chase Brown came up. He made a very interesting comment or two to the Pro Football Talk guys that we'll talk about as well. Let's pick one of those topics here to finish up this segment before we get to the rest.
Oh, right now, before we get to that, well, let's start next segment then with Joe Mixon. Before I tell you about or after I tell you about FanDuel, rather. But
okay, let's just do that. We'll jump in to everything Zac Taylor had to say, from running backs to coaching changes to how going 9-8 has changed his approach to 2024. Coming up next.
Get buckets with your first bet with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. And the other day, well, I threw $5 on the Miami Heat, and guess what? Boom, hit that money line. And if I was a new customer with FanDuel, that would have been $150. So don't delay. Get there now. And whether it's NFL futures, whether it's NFL draft, whether it's the Bengals Super Bowl chances and Super Bowl 59 and their future, well, from quick bets to same game parlays, exclusive props, FanDuel has it all. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and get your bonus today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook of the NBA.
Joe Mixon, Chase Brown, running back talk in Indy from Zac Taylor and Duke Tobin, really, but we're focused on Zac Taylor today, James. What do you think? Joe Mixon, has your opinion changed as to whether or not he's playing running back for the Cincinnati Bengals in 2024?
It feels really up in the air right now. And much like last year, I think it's going to be dependent on what the Bengals do in that first few days of free agency, because I don't think they want to be left with nothing. At running back alongside Chase Brown. And so I think they'll target a running back, a veteran running back. We could debate for days, it feels like, about whether or not that's the right way to go. I think that the cap hit is far too much for what you get from Joe. I get he's a fan favorite. So we'll see. Ultimately, I would still be surprised if he's on the roster at this stage, but I think it's more of a toss-up than some may be willing to admit. And there's a lot of people that will probably see this and hear this and say, oh, well, that's crazy. Look at his numbers. And I'm going to be very clear about this. I don't care who you listen to, how you feel, what end of the spectrum you're on right now when it comes to his future, but his future is very much up in the air, and they have not made the determination that he will be back next year. I know that for a fact. So what happens until it happens, I'm not going to say he's gone, and I'm certainly nowhere near willing to say that Joe Mixon will be on the roster either. But that is a big offseason question that's still lingering.
The closest thing to an endorsement we heard about Joe Mixon came from Zac Taylor talking to the Pro Football Talk guys before he was on the podium, when he said that he helped the team down the stretch after Joe Burrow got hurt, that he was an important player to the team. And Florio asked him point blank, should we expect him to be on the team next year? And Taylor said, I'm going to say the same thing I told you last year. And the answer is that I think he will be. But at the same time, he and Duke Tobin both left the door open and did not want to get into hypotheticals and decisions. Duke Tobin acknowledged the roster bonus that Joe Mixon is due 5 days after the start of the new league year. So early on in the unrestricted free agency acquisition process for the Bengals, they will know where they stand at the running back position, to your point, James, and they can make a decision there. It goes hand in hand, I think, with what Zach had to say about Chase Brown, where he didn't start a lot earlier in the year. He kind of addressed that because of the teams they were playing at the beginning of the year and the protection challenges that the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens posed, and Chase Brown needing some time to adapt to the NFL game and learn protection rules a little bit more. Hopefully in year 2, he's ready to go with that stuff, because he's certainly willing. It's just a matter of the mental part of the game for him coming along and the speed of the game settling down for Chase Brown, because we saw his upside. And he also referenced, one of the reasons that it was so late in the year was when they were ready to use him a ton is when he pulled his hamstring, as we've talked about and talked about during the season. So sounds like Chase Brown is in line for a bigger opportunity. Sounds like they're pretty encouraged with Chase Brown, but I still think it doesn't sound like, to me, there's this thought that, bell cow back Chase Brown is the future. He has a role. It will be bigger, but it didn't sound like bell cow Chase Brown is the future.
No, and I don't think the Bengals are going to have a bell cow this year. That's the interesting part when you look at this backfield and what it should be, how it should be. And I know we're talking about Zach, but the overall theme, Zach, Duke, what Dan Pitcher said on Wednesday, it's all about explosive plays. Everybody's talking about explosive plays. Part of that does come with a running game. And so we will see what they do. I do think Chase Brown's a big factor in the backfield, but will there be a bell cow back for the Bengals in 2024? I don't think so. I think it's going to be a committee. Unless
there's a surprise in the draft, I am inclined to agree with that. And I say surprise because it would be a surprise. I mean, I don't think I'd be surprised if they take a running back, but I might be surprised if they take a running back who immediately steps in and is a 250 touch plus running back as a rookie. It doesn't feel like that kind of class. Let's talk a little bit about what Zach had to say about the coaches he brought in, that process, before I want to finish with a pretty interesting quote that the Zach had for Mike Florio and Sims on the PFT stage right in front of the podiums. But what stood out to you when Zach was talking about his new coaching hires?
Well, I think he mentioned fresh perspective. I think he did use the word fresh. And there were a lot of people that were asking for that. And the Bengals did it. I mean, they added to their offensive staff, and it is different. And they added from the outside. They didn't just promote from within. The other thing that stood out is something that we've talked about. Zach was never not, at least to me, there was never real consideration of him giving up the play calling. I know there was rumblings of that, but he quickly said that he really liked Dan, but that, that they were going to keep the structure the way it is. And I don't think that's ego driven, but I don't think the plan for Zac being the play caller ever really changed. So those are the two things that stood out the most. But the fresh perspective part of it is certainly something people asked for. It was a theme 6-7 weeks ago when we were talking about the offseason, and Zac mentioned that as well.
And he also talked about, some of the similarities with the new passing game coordinator from Minnesota LA system, reminding him of things that he had forgotten that they used to do and things that, he could incorporate again. So again, that perspective is so important. And it goes hand in hand with this quote that I'm about to mention, where he wrapped up talking to the PFT guys saying, when you go 9-8, you can't walk away feeling like anything is good enough. It's created new urgency within our coaching staff, our players. That wasn't good enough. Everything we were doing, we have to reevaluate and get a little uncomfortable. And that last bit could be lip service, right? Could be, this is what I'm supposed to say when things don't go well. But that's what you would hope is happening behind the scenes. Reevaluating processes, reevaluating systems, reevaluating the kinds of players that they're bringing into the system, making sure that what they are doing is up to date with what's happening in the NFL. And when you bring in a bunch of new voices in the coaching staff, push yourself into that realm of discomfort to try to get better. That's what you would ask your coaching staff to do, to stay adaptive and try to stay up with the ever-changing NFL trends.
No doubt. And they have no choice. They know. And I mentioned this on yesterday's show. Duke Tobin said it. What was he most proud of? And he was like, nothing. We finished 9-8 and we were hoping to win the damn Super Bowl. And so I think that attitude is throughout the organization. It's a common theme. And so you're right. That's good. I hadn't heard that quote. I haven't seen the whole PFT interview yet, but that's thanks for sharing that, because that should be their mindset. They have the talent. They're going to have to add more talent. They're going to have to push things in evolve. That's part of what I think this offseason is going to be about. This offense is going to look different. The running back by committee, it's been a two-headed monster. I think it could be a three-headed monster by the time we're in the offseason program and we look at how the dust is settled. So we'll see what happens, but they're certainly making changes and hopefully the right ones.
And that is always a challenge. Like I said, this could just be coach speak. This could just be lip service. This is something that is very much the right thing to say. But at the same time, the willingness to embrace discomfort is something that really speaks to me individually. Like that's something that resonates with Jake, the podcast host, the guy who talks about the Bengals, that just openness to change and bringing in many new voices and a lot of guys that are from unfamiliar systems or unfamiliar places. It's not like they're just bringing in a bunch of people that Zac has worked with before. It sounds like they really did talk to a good number of new voices, and bringing those into the building, having those perspectives could help. The one other thing that, you would probably like to see, just to make sure we're not totally letting them off the hook here, is as part of the process of looking at their draft class contributions that are part of their current core. When you look at it, there aren't a ton of guys that they've drafted that are long-term fixtures on this team right now. They have some guys in the last two classes that really need to step up and solidify their positions as part of the Bengals core going forward, guys that need to earn their second contracts. But, we can talk about the front office forever with this team and their willingness or preference to have a smaller scouting staff than the rest of the NFL, a smaller personnel group than the rest of the NFL. That doesn't appear to be changing. Although some people have pointed out to me, James, that hiring more coaches means for the Bengals, de facto, you have more scouts. There are more eyes and more opinions in the room and at the combine this week for the Cincinnati Bengals, and there have been in years past.
Yeah, it is a good point. It's interesting, right? But I do think the fact that they've added to their staff is noteworthy. That alone, just because of the history, because of how they're viewed, I think, or the perception of them at least. The fact that they've added to their staff this offseason, brought in some new offensive pieces on that staff, it does matter, and it is worth noting.
From a number of different places too, NFL and college ranks. We'll have more for you from the NFL Combine to finish up the week before the players start running in underwear and lifting 225 pounds on the bench press over and over, and we'll get some results
I'd
from
crush you.
testing for
I'd
next week.
crush you.
No
I'd
doubt.
crush you, Jake.
Of course. You have those short little arms. You know how much easier it is for you to bench press?
Short little arms.
than
Yeah,
me?
right. I bet you have like a half-inch longer arm than I do.
Yeah, it's probably not very different. Got to have an excuse somewhere. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.